Russell Westbrook joining the Nuggets.
I think that's a good prediction. I would go Georgia Ole Miss.
Hugh Freeze said the same thing over and over and over again.
The subtle roasting of Florida State
may be a good lesson for Brandon Ayuk.
The Locked On Podcast Network presents The Big 6 in 60. The 6 biggest national sports stories from the local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Get the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 60 minutes. The Big 6 in 60 starts now with the biggest story in sports.
There's a Russell in Denver. Nuggets country, let's ride.
You are Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The Los Angeles Clippers agreed to a deal sending Russell Westbrook to the Utah Jazz. Russ will once again be bought out by the Utah Jazz. It's nice of the Jazz to facilitate this for Russ. He's now a 2-time member of the Utah Jazz officially on his career sheet, despite having never played a game. So the answer for this is like a friend of mine, a casual friend that doesn't really follow the NBA, was like, wait, I thought he was going to the Jazz. And I was like, well, he is. But he's going to be a Nugget? Yes. But the Nuggets are not in Utah. I was like, that's right. And I was like, this is pretty common practice. And just for those of you that might be new, pretty common practice. You got a contract you want to get rid of. You're up against a cap or tax. You find a team that's not up against the cap or the tax. You trade in the player along with a pick. And in this case, you get Chris Dunn back because the Jazz wanted to move off of him. And then you buy him out. And so Russell Westbrook will be waived. And then the Denver Nuggets will select him off of waivers. So when we talked about how this stuff always, like, it just doesn't, whenever it's like, oh, this is going to happen, like Russ wants to play with Denver, they're expecting to get him. This stuff just kind of happens that way. And it's very rare that doesn't go down. And here's another case of that happening. So I'll be very interested to see, do they do a presser for him? Does he come to Denver and do like a whole intro presser? I don't know if I'll be around for it because it might be next week and I'm going to be on vacation. But if not, the guys, I'm sure, will have coverage of that press conference here on the show. Look, I think the way that I wrote about this at the Action Network, do not think of Russell Westbrook as a Kentavious Caldwell-Pope replacement. And to be honest, he's not even really a Reggie Jackson replacement. The better way to kind of think of it is that Russell Westbrook is a 2 years removed or a year removed Bruce Brown replacement. That's the closest role, right? Bruce is a better shooter. I think Bruce is probably at his apex, probably a little bit better, depending on matchup, a little bit better defender than Russ, even though Russ has gotten really good in the later stages of his career. But that same kind of straight up and down, north-south, get the ball, push pace, get to the rim, that Bruce Brown brought in the playoffs, Russell Westbrook can accommodate that pretty well. The shooting is going to frustrate you at times. Like, there will be nights when you're going to be really frustrated with the amount of jumpers that Russell Westbrook takes and with how bad he is on those jumpers. Like, there will just be a lot of nights where you're just going to be like, God, those shots are just so killer. They've bugged every single franchise that he's been on, going back to Oklahoma City. He's never been good at them. He always takes them. And I will say this, like, he wants that. If Russ can find a way to actually add that jumper in the later stages of his career, much the same way that Jason Kidd added a 3-point shot in the last couple of years of his career after not being a great 3-point shooter, it fundamentally changes everything about Russ. But the odds are that's not going to happen, that Russ is not going to be able to do that. That said, there's a lot of ways in which Russ raises the floor for this team, where will not be situations in the regular season in which he is unplayable. I think there will be a lot of playoff situations in which he's unplayable if he's still on the roster. We'll talk about that later. But Russ will pretty much raise the floor just by like competent, we'll make sure everybody's in line. We'll make sure the offense is where it needs to be, and we'll be aggressive, getting to the rim, getting past the initial point of attack, forcing help. In the minutes in which he plays with Nikola Jokic, which I'm expecting, I have no reason to suspect that Michael Malone is going to go away from the Jamal Murray stagger. I just don't have any. That's entirely possible that they just handcuff Jamal and Nikola, which I've said they need to do for some time. But Assuming that doesn't happen, and even so, they can't play all their minutes together. There will be times where Jokic shares the floor with Westbrook, and those will be really interesting because one of the things I noted in my article is I think we could talk about when Jokic has the ball and Russell Westbrook's off ball, and he can be a great cutter with his athleticism, timing, and feel for the ball. And Jokic can get the most out of him that way. But what's interesting when Russ does have the ball when Jokic is on the court, there are ways in which that means that Jokic may not have to actually have the ball every single possession, which he needed to have whenever it was Reggie Jackson. So Russ can just run a basic pick and roll with Nikola, and Nikola doesn't necessarily have to be heavily involved in multiple 2, 3, 4 actions on every single possession because Russ does know how to generate some looks on his own and kick the ball out, etc., and get to the rim. The other thing I think is I did kind of think about this. The best that Russ has ever played with a center was Steven Adams, who is not a Ivica Zubac, Daniel Gafford, Clint Capella type big, where it's just like set a pick, roll to the rim, try and get a lob. Adams is much more of runs DHOs. Adams is a better passer. Adams is a great screener. Now, I'm not trying to compare Steven Adams and Nikola Jokic because Jokic is way better in every single aspect of the game. But I do think it's interesting that Russ had more success when he had a competent, versatile, more savvy front court partner to work with rather than some of these other situations in which he's had pretty replacement level, at least of archetype bigs. Like I think Ivica Zubac is a good player. So is Clint Capella. But having those guys, they're very much just like set a pick, roll to the rim, try and dunk the lob. Jokic isn't that. And so maybe there's actually a level to this in which they actually are able to get along a little bit better. And those sequences, work a little bit better. The Russ, Jamal, Jokic lineups I'm going to be very interested in because it provides you an opportunity for Jamal maybe to work a little bit more off ball and get to his 3-point shot a little bit more and not just have to spam 2-man action, which got to be a little bit of a problem last year. John says Adams is better at setting picks. He sets harder picks. I'm not sure that he is better than Nicole. I think they're about pretty even at setting picks. Nelson says if Russ comes in humble, he'll be an all-star again before Murray with Jokic. That is not true. Russell Westbrook is 36 years old, Nelson. He's 36. It has been 4 seasons since he was an all-star. Russell Westbrook will not be an all-star this season. That will not happen. Get that out of your head right now. There's a lot of ways in which Jamal can benefit from this relationship, not only with the on-court stuff, but the off-court stuff. But I think it's going to take an openness from Jamal Murray, which I'm very curious to see if that happens. And that's also part of why I think it's so interesting that Nikola Jokic wanted Russell Westbrook on this team. I think that there's like a really interesting dynamic here with Jamal Murray. Hurricane says Matt loves all the old guys except for Russ, for shame. It's not that I don't look. I loved Russell Westbrook when he was with the Thunder. I thought like his first, 7 years were just so phenomenal. He was so underrated. Like I used to write about him as a serious MVP candidate next to Durant because there were a lot of seasons where I thought he was giving more than KD did. He was phenomenal. And I do like veterans, and I do think this is an upgrade, and I do think it's fine. I just think that that's the whole deal is like, it's a 36-year-old backup point guard who is better than their last one. It's fine. It's a pretty good deal. It's totally fine. There will be some stuff that comes with it, and that a lot of that has to do with, Russ's attitude. So I do want to make sure that I'm very clear about the attitude part of this. Russ is not Boogie. He is not Boogie Cousins. One of the things that frustrated me a lot about his Laker tenure and how he got scapegoated by certain individuals and agencies that are associated with the Lakers is that Russell Westbrook is universally lauded as a teammate and a person to be around in every stop he's had except the Lakers when it comes to anything that isn't media. So, and I don't, I will make comments about this because it's part of his public persona, but it doesn't matter. Like, it's way more important that Russell Westbrook is like kind and respectful and a loving and like warm presence and a positive force for the people that deal with him on a day-to-day basis for hours than it is that he does not like spending time with the media for 15 minutes every couple of days. It's way more important. Everyone in OKC loves the guy. Like they speak volumes about how great of a leader he is and how positive he is and how supportive he is. The teammates, the staff members, that he's just like a really great guy to be around. Houston, same deal. The Washington Wizards, same deal. The Clippers, same deal. Now he's constantly moved on because Russ only knows how to really play one way and he's never really adapted. And that's, reduced his ability to be an impactful player. But I gotta really stress this, that Russ has a bad reputation for barking with fans and for his interactions in the media. But as far as how he treats people on the team, it's nothing but positive. I've always heard that. But at the same time, Russ is a hyper competitive, as confident as you're going to find individual, and he's going to be aggressive in all phases, and he's going to go at the Nuggets from day one in practice, and he's going to go at Jamal, and he's going to challenge Jamal, and he'll challenge Joker, and he'll challenge Aaron, and he'll challenge Michael Malone. And the Nuggets have not really had that dynamic in the Jokic era. Paul Millsap was a quiet guy. He was a quiet veteran that did the job. They drafted Michael Porter Jr., who has a lot of thoughts on a lot of subjects that he shares on various platforms, but isn't like a barking, dominant alpha type personality. Aaron Gordon got here and wanted to find synergy and play good basketball next to Nikola. And as always, the team will always take on the personality of the best player, and that's Nikola. And Nikola is just not one for dramatics, histrionics, or for super aggressive alpha male showboating. That's not how he goes through life. I think he's pretty tough dude, but that doesn't mean that he's showing it all the time. Russ is very emphatic, and he's going to challenge you, and he's going to bark, and he's going to do all these types of things. And there's a lot of ways in which I think you can argue the Nuggets could use that, and it could be a real positive. I don't think you can say they really need that because they won a title without it. So I don't think that you could say they need it. But it's going to be an interesting dynamic because it can make you better. It can also breed a lot of conflict. If he and Malone butt heads and neither one's willing to shift and they're not willing to find a common ground to work together, that might be a problem. If Russ is constantly challenging Jamal and that doesn't sit well with Jamal as the franchise cornerstone guy in not a contract year, have gotten the extension by then. We don't know how that's going to go. I'm not saying it's going to go badly because it could go really great, but it's something to really watch. This is just an unknown variable that, quite honestly, I haven't covered in the Jokic era. I haven't covered a personality like this in my entire time with the Nuggets. There has never been a player here since I've been here with that kind of mindset and approach and attitude. Now, again, Russ is 36 and he's at a very different point in his career. But I think it's really going to be interesting to see how that kind of plays out. A lot of questions in the comments about Jamal not signing yet. Again, every expectation is that he's going to get back from the Olympics. They're going to hammer out whatever details they're going to hammer out, and they're going to get a contract signed. I don't expect there to be any changes. If there is one, then we'll talk about it then. But the news right now is mostly that he's going to sign the extension. They're going to figure it out. Now, if Jamal is just no stipulations, no conditions, full 5 years, fully guaranteed, full supermax, no limitations, no bonus structures, nothing, no partial guarantees, no team option, just the full 5 and a player option in the 4th year. If those are the case, if that's how it's going to be, I think eventually they'll probably get there, but it might take a little bit more time for the Nuggets to finally cave and get there. But that's, to me, I think the Nuggets have already signaled that they're going to re-sign him. So I don't think there's any question that that's going to happen, regardless of how people feel about it right now in this particular moment. KM24 says, I feel like they don't want to give Jamal a guaranteed contract because of his performance these playoffs, and they're trying to protect their investment. I don't know that you can look at last year, which was essentially an extension contract year for Jamal, and say, well, he's better when you make him prove it. You just showed that wasn't true. So maybe giving him the money gives him that assurance and then he plays better. And if you go well, that can't be true. Well, who's that true for? Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown's a perfect example of this, where they gave Jaylen Brown the money and then Jaylen Brown was better than ever. So I think that's part of the equation here. Chris says, I think Westbrook has grown a lot over the years. think in some ways, I think you're right. I think every player kind of mellows as they get their mid-30s and they start to see the end of their career. And when you have to go to the bench, it's a little bit humbling. Like there's growth. Like we all grow through our 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s. Like that's pretty natural. I would just say that there's not a lot of evidence that Russ has like adapted his game to be the best version that he can be in this era. There's still a lot of why not to him. Like that was his whole ethos, was why not? Because the whole idea was, why can't I play the game on my terms? Why can't I be this type of person? Why can't I wear these outfits? Why can't I be a superstar who's not good with the media? Like everything was always on Russ's terms. And when you build your entire ethos like that, and that's what led to you being an MVP and considered a top 5 player in the league, it's really hard to let go of that idea, even as you hit your mid-30s. But if there's a little bit of give on his part, I think that they could be a really good fit here in Denver, because this will be the best system I think he's ever played in. I don't think there's been a better offensive system than he's played in here in terms of getting everybody involved. There were great offenses in Houston, but it was built around Harden, and the Clippers had a lot of firepower, but it was mostly ISO ball with Kawhi and PG and Harden. This is the first time that Russell Westbrook's been part of a team like this, and that's what's going to be really fascinating, I think, to see about it.
No football, no NBA, no problem with FanDuel. With baseball, WNBA, and soon the Olympics, there's plenty to dive into over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day all summer long. We've been talking about quarterback rankings, and FanDuel has odds on which quarterback will lead the league in passing. The favorite, no surprise, Patrick Mahomes, 7-1 to pace all passers. And right behind him, maybe a bit of a surprise, 8-1, CJ Stroud is the only QB with odds better than 10-1. Tua Tagovailoa and Dak Prescott check in 10-1. Jared Goff and Joe Burrow 11-1 to have the most passing yards. So what are you waiting for? Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
I think that's a good prediction. I would go Georgia Ole Miss.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football.
Jordan Rodgers, ESPN SEC Network, joining me here on the show. Jordan, appreciate you taking the time. I want your reaction to Nick Saban's SEC championship game prediction. Texas and Georgia. Do you think he's right?
Actually, that's the first time I'm hearing that. I think that's a good prediction. I would go Georgia Ole Miss. I'm really high and bullish on Ole Miss. They're not just the talent that they have on offense returning. Juice Wells coming over from South Carolina 2 years ago. He was one of the best receivers in the SEC. But defensively, what they added, I think is finally going to allow this Ole Miss team to be balanced, something we haven't seen in a long time, which is really scary for how good their offense can be. One
reason I spoke earlier on today's show about why I cast doubt on the Georgia-Texas matchup, both teams have really tough schedules.
Yeah.
You look at Georgia's schedule and Texas' schedule, 2 of the 3 or 4 toughest in the entire SEC. Which team you feel like is more capable of navigating that slate?
I think it's hard to bet against Georgia just because of how they recruit. And really, I said this yesterday, when that schedule gets dropped, every team, 15 teams in the SEC, go look, do we have to play Georgia? Georgia doesn't scurry on that day and go, who do we have to play? Like, everybody has to play Georgia. Now, on the Texas side, the reason I maybe lean more towards Georgia on that question is Texas got 3 draft picks at wide receiver they got to replace. 2 of them were 2 of the best in the entire country last year. I think Quinn Ewers is one of the best in the country as well, but you got new pieces on that side of the ball. I will say Sark as being one of the best play callers, the offense and defensive line, the way they've recruited, the size they have, they're going to compete. I mean, they're going to make a deep run at this thing, no doubt. I just think I'd let the 2-time national champions in the last 3 years, take the lead on that one.
You look at the SEC, and you've covered this league for a long time, and now there's a little bit of new buzz this week at SEC Media Days with Texas and Oklahoma. There are a lot of questions about Texas and Oklahoma that go to other schools about playing against them, recruiting against them. What was your initial reaction to Texas and Oklahoma joining the league?
I think it just elevates the tradition, the competitiveness, the talent, the passion of an SEC conference that was already the best in the entire country. So you got 2 amazing places to go to. I still have not been to Norman. That's the one place I'm excited to go see. I haven't been. I'm excited to go there. I've spent a lot of time in Austin, and we were there a couple weeks ago to kind of kick off this whole thing with Texas. There was like 30, 40,000 people there. I mean, it was unbelievable. So they're ready. Excited to get to Oklahoma. But it's 2 programs that are storied, that have tradition, and that immediately are going to compete in this conference, no doubt, in every single sport, let alone football.
They go from the Big 12 to the SEC. I think it's fair to assess that the level of physicality and defense is a step up. How do you think Texas and Oklahoma are preparing to adapt to that sort of transition?
Well, Sark, not that Brent Venables doesn't understand it, he absolutely does, but I think Sark was so pointed at recruiting the offensive and defensive line 2 or 3 years ago, 2 years ago, really starting that process for this moment. Not that he knew or predicted that he was going to be here, but he knew that the line of scrimmage coming from Alabama was the most important thing in the entire country. So coaches that aren't in the SEC, before they come here, they kind of scoff at the idea that, it's so much harder. And yeah, look, there's good teams everywhere. The physicality is so underrated because you get beat up at the line of scrimmage every single week, no matter if it's Missouri or Kentucky. Those teams are as physical as anybody at the line of scrimmage. So I think that's what sneaks up on you. I think the added bye week, so each team's going to have 2, is really going to help in extending the livelihood of those guys up front and their bodies, keeping them healthy. But the line of scrimmage is definitely different in this league, and they'll need to adapt to that.
Speaking of scheduling, something that's being pondered, and there was a report from Ross Dellinger that it's going to be considered more after the season, which I think makes a lot of sense to see how the committee views SEC teams and their records in the 12-team playoff era. What do you make of a potential 9-game conference slate for the SEC? They currently played 8.
Yeah, I think they have to, and I think it'll happen at some point. Being selfish on my end, being on the broadcasting side, I want one more SEC game, just one more matchup. But I think you're right. Now that the playoff is so expanded, when you have a one-loss SEC team, it didn't matter they only played 8. When it was a college football playoff of 4, they're probably going to make it if they're a champion, right? That's just how it is. Now that there's 12, that strength of schedule and who you play from those spots 9 to 12 are going to be really important because there's going to be a lot of similarities between a lot of those teams that are maybe sitting at 10-2, right? And some have a tough strength of schedule and some don't. So I think that's only exaggerated with the 12 teams now. So I think the SEC will do what's right. Greg Sankey always has the future in his mind. He's always thinking with great foresight. They'll get there, and I hope they get there sooner rather than later.
I asked a member of the college football playoff who led off the remarks earlier today at SEC Media Days about how they're going to balance that strength of schedule, record, and all those factors. And it was kind of a non-answer. It was
always is.
It was.
It always is.
It somewhat is. I don't think it's necessarily the wrong mindset, though, to say we're going to consider this, we're also going to consider that, but I do think it has to be team dependent. I was actually kind of pleased to hear that he didn't have a uniform response of, we're going to value this more, we're going to value that more, because this record, you're not where your record says you are. You might have a much easier strength of schedule, even within the SEC.
Totally.
Every schedule is different.
Yeah, it's apples and oranges, and I've sat in those mock college football playoff committee meetings. It's really hard. It's harder than you think, and at times, you apply one metric to a group of 2 or 3 teams, and you kind of have to apply another metric to a different group of 2 or 3 teams just based on the context. And I think that's important. One standard is not going to fit across the board, right? I mean, this is a nuanced sport. Every game is different. Every environment is different. Playing on the road at certain places is easier than others, at night versus in the day. I mean, there's so many factors that go into this thing. So the human element is needed, but that also means there's always going to be controversy with that 13, 14, 15 team that ends up getting left out.
I think we could have a 24-team playoff like the FCS.
Let's go. Come on.
You'd still have controversy.
Oh, you would, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I'm not going for the 24-team playoff. I would have to go for a mental hop, skip, and a jump for me to get there. But 2 questions to get you out of here on Jordan. One of them, got to ask you about just, you've been around the SEC a lot. You've gone to different stadiums. You've been all around. Is there a favorite place that you have to go to experience a game day environment? I know there are a lot of great ones, and just so we're clear, just because he picks one doesn't mean he doesn't like your team and your stadium.
But Twitter X, they never remember that, so it is what it is. I'm going to give you 2 different answers to that. The day pregame experience, you got to go to the Grove, Oxford. I don't think there's anything like it. And just being a California boy that grew up going to every Pac-10 stadium at the time, now they're not Pac-12 anymore. They're nothing anymore. But it's different. Like, people dress up, there's chandeliers and tents, and it's just, the pageantry is crazy. So that was really fun for a California boy that, played in the SEC, but now since I'm on the other side of it, getting to go and enjoy those things, there's nothing like that. And then Death Valley at night, I think, is so special. Like, it is everything it's cracked up to be. I'll give you an undercover one, though. One of my favorite places at night to go do a game is actually Columbia, South Carolina. like sandstorm playing before the. I mean, it gets wild. It's not 100,000 people. Yeah. It's 60 something, but it gets as crazy and as hostile as almost anywhere in the SEC. So that's one place that everyone's like, oh, really, South Carolina? I'm like, no, you got to go to a game at night there. It's different.
That feels like if I asked you the question about the ACC, then the answer might be Virginia Tech. One that kind of flies under the radar.
Totally.
I understand, man. Great tradition. Lastly, you're a Vanderbilt grad. I know Vanderbilt doesn't have high hopes in football. Yeah. They've got the lowest win total in the SEC this year.
Kick me while I'm down, but yeah.
Do you have a sense of what to expect from your Commodores this season? Can they go over that 2.5 win total?
I think they can, and there's hope because of the changes they made, right? I mean, Clark Lee's never going to be allowed in Las Cruces, New Mexico again, because he went there, he took their former head coach, he took their offensive coordinator, and he took their starting quarterback, and he ran out of there like a bandit. When I flip on the New Mexico State, Tim Beck and his offense that he's bringing to Vandy kind of reminds me of what we did in 2011 as we really started to turn that corner, get to our first bowl game before going to back-to-back bowl games. I was not really developed as a passer, and we ran me a lot. I ran 15, 16 times a game, quarterback design runs, finding creative ways to steal yards. Because at Vandy, you're never going to line up against an SEC team and be more talented. That's just the fact. Doesn't mean you can't win. We won 9 games being the less talented team every time we step on an SEC field, but you have to find ways to get creative. And when I look at this offense, it's going in that direction. So, yeah, they're not going to flip the switch and win 6, 7, 8 games next year, but I think this is the start of some momentum and a path to get back to that.
Jordan Rodgers, ESPN, SEC Network. Jordan, thanks for the time.
For sure, man.
Hugh Freeze said the same thing over and over and over again.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers.
Hugh Freeze just got off of the main stage, and he kind of called the media out a little bit. And he said the same thing over and over and over again, saying, like, y'all aren't talking about Jarquez Hunter. You're not talking about Auburn's running game. You're not talking about Damari Austin or Jeremiah Cobb, but whatever. Those guys don't care. They're going to be an effective group, and they're going to be one of the best running back groups, not only in the SEC, but the entire country.
I always find it very telling when a coach name drops about something when it's unsolicited. I always had the opportunity to be in a little private media session with them earlier, and Jarquez Hunter was brought up by Hugh Freeze as well. And he said verbatim, I love that he's under the radar and nobody is talking about him. None of the media. Yeah. And he said, unless I'm mistaken, he's the leading returning rusher in the SEC. And I think that really speaks volumes about that running back room. We've talked about ratios and Hugh Freeze loving to throw it 55% of the time. But Zach, here's what I believe. I believe you play to your strengths. Hugh Freeze seems to want to do that. And he knows that if having a solid running attack and running it, more than he normally does because of what you have in that running back room leads to victories, that's what he'll do.
Yeah, and we've talked about it before. Like, what does Auburn need to do on offense better, significantly better than a year ago? And obviously, like, passing is part of that. But the key thing is they've got to stay on the field. I mean, they were so bad on third down, and they were so bad at getting first downs early in drives and early in games where it was just 3 and out after 3 and out after 3 and out, or maybe they get a first down and then they punt. I mean, it was just not great. They didn't sustain drives. And so how do you fix that? Well, you either make third downs more manageable, or you convert in third and shorts, or you obviously can convert in third and long in the passing game. But the most likely one of those is you make as many third downs manageable as possible. And you do that by winning the first and second down. And the easy way to do that is a successful running game with Jarquez Hunter and company.
Yeah, and last year it was for a different reason. Hugh Freeze admitted that he felt like he had a little bit of a depth problem along the defensive line. So running the ball 60% of his offensive possessions allowed to keep his defense off the field. I think he knows, and we all know, that it can't be 60-40. There has to be some more proficiency through the passing game, and he'll get there. But again, if you have something that's elite, or you have a strength of your team that is probably as good as anybody in the best conference in America, and that's that running back room, and he mentioned all 3 by name, then you don't go away from it. And I think what that'll do, Zach, also think about how effective the passing game becomes in an RPO system if you're running it effective. You're going to look better. You're going to have a higher efficiency. You can't stack the box, the stacking the box thing, they may at some point have to stack the box, or you're going to have to throw it. I mean, I think they play off each other. And so you need to be able to throw efficiently, but if the running game sets that up, then you go with it because play action's always there.
And I do think there will be teams that say, hey, Peyton, we don't think you can throw it. We're going to stack the box. Like, I do think that's going to be a situation that Auburn runs into this year. And I think they are now equipped to take advantage of that. I don't think they were a year ago. I think they will be this upcoming season. But yeah, the running back room, Hugh Freeze said it over and over and over again. It's like, y'all are underrating our backs, which I think is great. The other thing was the offensive line. I mean, he's really happy with this offensive line. The addition of Percy. He keeps saying Connor Lew, even though he's not ever really asked about him. He keeps finding a way to bring up the returning center. And then obviously Xavier Miller's taking that step forward. He didn't really say Dylan Wade's name, I don't think, but obviously scooting your left tackle into left guard is a win. And Jeremiah Wright's been here for forever. But just that entire situation up front is such a breath of fresh air, especially when you couple it with the fact that Auburn's running backs are that respected by their head coach.
It's a lethal combination. He didn't say it in the main media room, but he did mention that sliding Wade to guard makes the offensive line that much better. And he also has said twice that Connor Lew is a future NFL center. Now, look, for those that have struggled for years with offensive line recruiting and offensive line play at Auburn, is that not music to your ears that you have future NFL prospects on your offensive line right now? Not that they can play in the league right now, but you know they're projected to be in the league. You combine that, like you said, with a lethal running attack. And again, I feel like that's going to open up so much downfield, so much for Cam Coleman to take the top off the defense. Peyton Thorne will be more comfortable. And listen, while we're talking about the offensive line and we're talking about the running game, he also did mention that there is still a plan to let Peyton utilize his legs because he felt like it was effective.
Yeah, I mean, he was a good runner a year ago. No question about it. I don't think they're going to lock that down by any stretch of the imagination. But all in all, I think Hugh Freeze, I think he was solid on the big stage, on the main stage, kind of making his return trip, his second year here now as Auburn's head coach. He was asked a lot of questions. Some of them were pretty odd questions, but he was asked a question by Dukes of On 3, specifically about Damari Alston. And he said the first word that came to mind was leader. He's a leader, and gave him credit. He's like, Jarquez is kind of the lead back, but Damari's the leader because Jarquez is kind of that quiet, soft-spoken guy who, works his tail off. But Damari is the vocal guy, which makes sense, right? I mean, we talked about how great of a recruiter Damari was when he was a recruit, and he recruited more than the previous head coach did. And it's nice to kind of see that that's still recognized and appreciated, Daryl.
He said that he was on the leadership council that Hugh Freeze has that helps with culture and climate. If anything needs to be said in the running back room that Hugh Freeze wants to send a message through a player, he delivers that through Damari Alston. He's the one that will speak up. And then he said, oh, by the way, he's a heck of a football player. And again, that's when he lit up like a firecracker and said, I feel like we got three of the best backs and then no one's talking about them, and that's fine. So a lot of pleasant things from a leadership standpoint we heard in this Auburn Media Day today.
GameTime makes getting to the ballpark even faster and easier. Prices on the GameTime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and their best price guarantee, GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. GameTime has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats. Find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets of football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And the GameTime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the free app, and new users can get $20 off their first purchase with code Locked On. Terms apply. That's code Locked On with $20 off your first purchase with GameTime. Download the GameTime app today. Last minute tickets, the lowest price guaranteed.
The subtle roasting of Florida State.
You are Locked On ACC, your daily podcast on the Atlantic Coast Conference.
this is pretty interesting stuff coming out of SEC Media Days. So SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey was being interviewed on 1010 XL Radio in Jacksonville, Florida, big sports radio station. And Jacksonville's right by Georgia, so there's a lot of obviously Florida fans there. There's also some Georgia fans there, and Commissioner Sankey was talking about Georgia not getting into the college football playoff last year. Obviously, Florida State fans, I believe, rightfully felt very snubbed by not getting in, but Georgia also feels like they were snubbed. And Sankey said, quote, Georgia was one of the 4 best teams in the nation, and they didn't get into the playoff, he said. But you didn't see us jumping up and down and complaining and hanging national championship banners, Sankey said. So it's pretty obvious. Without coming out and saying it, the implication is, hey, at least our guys didn't react the way Florida State reacted.
Absolutely. And you know what? I think it's a lot easier to say that when it was settled on the field. Now, again, this is one of those moments where I'm going to flatly say that the way I feel about Florida State personally has to go aside here because, again, I care for Florida State a ton, but this isn't me being biased for Florida State. This is an objective truth. An objective truth is Florida State won every game that was put in front of them. They beat everybody that was placed in front of them, period. No ifs, no ands, no buts about it. Georgia did not do that. That's an objective fact. That's not what I think happened. That's not what I want to happen. That's not how I wanted it to go for Georgia. Georgia objectively did not beat every team that was in front of them. So they left room for the committee to have interpretation of what they are not, how good they are not. Florida State, on the other hand, did not. Because I guarantee you, as sure as Sankey is talking all this and all that about, oh, no, we reacted like big kids and they were one of the 4 best, but we held our heads high. Yes, of course you held your heads high because you had not one, but Texas as well is now an SEC team. So 2 of your member universities who are going to be in it were represented. 2. So, of course, it's easy to say, hey, we didn't mope about it. We weren't sad about it, as opposed to a university who there was no other representation. There was nobody else there. They did not get a shot because, again, if it was settled on the field, Florida State belonged. But if it was settled somewhere else, if it was settled through recruiting battles, if it was settled through who rivals thought is the best team, who 24/7 thought is the best team, who On 3 thought is the best team, if it's settled through who ESPN recruiting thought is the best team, then say that and let's leave it there. But in the world where we play the games and let it happen, there was teams that left wiggle room. There were teams that did not. Florida State is firmly on the did not side. So Sankey, and I'll now take it to the point of, I talked about the past a little bit. Let me talk about the future. This reflects very poorly for Florida State because one of the 2 viable options for you to get more money is poking fun at you.
Yeah.
After the other one,
for them. Yeah.
After the other one has said repeatedly all this week, they have screamed up and down to everybody who would listen, we don't want them. This is like when they say the worst your crush could say is no. And she's like, ew, who is this weirdo that's trying to talk to me? The worst she can say is not, in fact, no. It's not, because the SEC and Big Ten have been talking out the side of their neck about Florida State all week. I feel bad for the folks in Tallahassee right now.
Yeah, and that wasn't the only thing that Sankey said about Florida State. And it's funny because I'm watching all these Greg Sankey interviews and some of these hosts are just like throwing out, hey, what do you think of Florida State? Where like they should know he's got to be very careful for obvious tampering reasons. So I was watching this interview on Next Round Live where they were talking with Sankey. And at first the host like flat out asked him like, hey, what about adding Florida State? He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like he was very funny and coy with the way that he handled it. And then they kind of rephrased the question about conference realignment and adding other teams. And so Sankey, it's very clear, obviously, that he's in constant communication with the 16 university presidents and chancellors within the SEC because he's their mouthpiece, right? And he references our chancellors, he said, do not want to be involved in any entanglements legally when it comes to realignment. So I know that you could hear that, and maybe the reaction is, well, hey, that means they could definitely be interested in Florida State. They just can't say it out loud. I guess maybe. But then Sankey also said something, Kent, and this was the money quote of that interview on Next Round Live. He said, in talking to the 16 member institutions, now the SEC is up to 16 after adding Oklahoma and Texas. He keeps saying how happy they are at 16. And he said, quote, they tell me we're not going to take our piece of the pie and slice it into more pieces because, yeah, the more members you add, the more money every school has to split with somebody else. So it sounds to me like Sankey. And then the other thing people bring up about the SEC, and I still think Florida State and Clemson could very well end up in the Big Ten. I'm not ruling that out despite all this noise, but I definitely don't think it's going to be the SEC, because another thing people bring up is when it comes to the footprint of the conference, they're already in the state of Florida and they're already in the state of South Carolina. So the Big Ten would need these universities more if they really want to expand their footprint coast to coast and expand their footprint into SEC territory. The Big Ten needs these schools more than the SEC does. And then Sankey says it right there, Kenton, something you and I have been saying for weeks. You have to get these schools to agree to split up their piece of the pie to add another member.
Yeah, this is tough. This is honestly really tough. They're at a really, because when you look at the other brands that the SEC added, Donald, how many teams did the SEC add this offseason?
2, right?
Yeah, Texas and Oklahoma, correct?
2. Yeah. 2
of the most historic brands in college sports, besides the fact that they have been objectively mid up until this last year, except with the exception of Oklahoma. They won a ton with Cliff Kingsbury, sure. But Texas has been very mid to the point where, there was a lot made about a horns down signal and whatnot. Like that's objectively. And before Texas fans come in here, we know it wasn't actually about the horns down thing. It was about another guy doing a chant that was similar and getting, all types of hell about it. Now, with that in mind, again, that conference just added 2 heavy hitters, and they're like, y'all don't swing heavy enough. You don't tip the scales enough for us to say value of cutting the pie versus the value of having them in the conference. You don't tip the scales in the way that you think you do. And so the Big Ten has to do something, or else the Big 12 might back into getting 2 of the biggest brands in college sports at an extreme, at pennies on the dollar at this point, which would just be a sham and a shame, because at that point, that means that Clemson and Florida State have potentially taken pay cuts for what? For like what? In the words of Cardi B, what was the reason? What was the reason?
No football, no NBA, no problem with FanDuel. With baseball, WNBA, and soon the Olympics, there's plenty to dive into over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. We've been talking about quarterback rankings, and FanDuel has odds on which quarterback will lead the league in passing. The favorite, no surprise, Patrick Mahomes, 7-1 to pace all passers. And right behind him, maybe a bit of a surprise, 8-1, CJ Stroud is the only QB with odds better than 10-1. Tua Tagovailoa and Dak Prescott check in 10-1. Jared Goff and Joe Burrow 11-1 to have the most passing yards. So what are you waiting for? Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners.
Billy Bowman took to the stage at SEC Media Days and had some really poignant things to say about a lot of different things. And we haven't gotten a chance to touch on all of them, but at some point we will. But I want to go this way right now. The safety room is considered one of the deepest positions and most talented positions on the team heading into 2024. And Bowman was very willing to heap some praise upon these younger safeties. Peyton Bowen, you asked him, who's a guy that you're bringing along that you think has a chance to be elite? And his answer pretty quickly was Peyton Bowen. He was asked about another guy, Robert Spears Jennings, and the quote, I want to read it exactly right here. He said, "Be prepared for seeing a lot of number 3. He'll be all over the field for us." And this is a kid, the in-state 4-star prospect that was out of the 2022 recruiting cycle that I really feel like is about to have a breakout season in Robert Spears-Jennings.
Yeah, Robert Spears-Jennings, man, Tulsa boy, exciting to see that he's as definitely rose up, right? I know that he dealt with a little bit of injuries or whatnot, but now it appears that he's going to take over that spot at free safety. He's got a lot more game close to the end of the season, and I think he's got it locked down. And so hearing Billy Bowman really praise him as well as Peyton Bowen, we knew that he was going to give Peyton praise. He's done that over the last year and talked about just how great of just a football player he is, instinctive and everything. Those two are going to be potentially the future, right? When Billy's gone, if Robert decides to come back for one more year, you'll have a combination of him and Peyton Bowen out there really running things, and then the other young bulls that's in the room. And so I had to ask him that question, and when he kind of broke down the Peyton Bowen and how he just needs to get it to all click, and he thinks that it most likely will click whenever Billy is gone himself. He thinks that Peyton's going to be the one to take over that room. Man, that just does nothing but get me excited. Phil Steele had Oklahoma's secondary room ranked as number 2 in the country, which is number 1 in the SEC. Something to be excited about, because that means that we got some talent in that room.
Yeah, it's not just Billy Bowman. It's Peyton Bowen. It's Robert Spears-Jennings. And then you can even go down the line with Jaden Hardy and Michael Boganowski and Reggie Powers and Michael Patterson-McDonald. And, hey, Cade McIntyre. I think this is the one that – not Cade McIntyre. Eric McCarty. Sorry. Yeah, Eric McCarty. Cade McIntyre is the tight end. Eric McCarty, McAllister kid. You've got a lot of talent in that safety room that Brandon Hall has put together. But I'm really excited about the three safety looks that we have the potential of seeing in 2024 with Bowen, and with Robert Spears-Jennings. What's great about it is you've got diverse skill sets. You've got a Peyton Bowen who is going to be able to range the middle of the field. He's going to be great in coverage. He's great instinctually. He's got those coverage skills. He was like this close to multiple interceptions last year, but we saw what he's able to do on special teams with the punt blocks. Like, that is incredible. That takes great instincts and timing and agility and athleticism to make that happen. And then with Robert Spears-Jennings, great box safety, a dude that can play around the line of scrimmage. He's not the size of a linebacker, but he thumps like a linebacker. I mean, he gets downhill in a hurry, and we've seen it in his first couple of years with Oklahoma. You go back to the 2022 season, and he's chasing down Jason Bean running out of the sideline, and he just hits him hard. Like, Bean's not out of bounds yet, so he makes sure to lay a thick lick on him as he's going out of bounds. And we saw it again last year when given opportunities in a rotational role. So really, really excited about what they're going to bring, both of those guys this year. Who knows exactly who's going to get those quote unquote starter reps, but I think we'll see them both in situational, in situations. Robert Spears-Jennings probably is going to be your base package safety, being able to play in the box a little bit, help support in the run. And then when it's 3rd and long, 3rd and 7+, you're probably going to see more Peyton Bowen, because he's going to be able to provide you something in covering tight ends, covering guys out of the slot. He's kind of an extra cheetah that you can put out on the field. So it gives them a lot of options at safety, depending on the down and distance, the situation in the game. I mean, if you're up 2-3 scores in a game, you're going to see a lot of Peyton Bowen, because teams are going to be trying to throw to get back in the game. And that's where he excels, is in coverage.
Absolutely. And even better with the way Zach Alley does things, he's infamous for throwing out a 3 safety, set up 3 safety high. And like you said, seeing all 3 of them out there at the same time, man, I'm terrified for other defenses, right? That's other offenses trying to figure out how to get around those guys, because they're so athletic too, right? And they're all sizey, right? I think Billy's the shortest of all of them or whatnot, because he's 5'11". The rest of them are all over 6 feet. Yeah, it's going to be a challenge to try to figure out how to throw it over them with their long arms and their ability and liking to hit. That's the one thing I've noticed about Venables and staff, especially Jay Valai and the players and him and Brandon Hall go after. The guy have to do is they like to hit people. They want thumpers. Right. I love that. Something that we miss here at Oklahoma are guys getting leveled on a regular basis, just physicality overall. We're getting that back. And so just be prepared that this safety room's it's not gonna be a surprise for most, right? We all knew that this was gonna come, but they're gonna be elite this coming season.
Yeah, it's going to be fantastic. You're going to see a lot of plays being made in the back end and around the line of scrimmage because, again, Robert Spears-Jennings, Billy Bowman, they know how to make plays around the line of scrimmage as well. We're probably going to see some Woody Washington at safety. Wouldn't be surprised to see some of the younger guys like Reggie Powers and Jaden Hardy and Michael Boganowski get some reps, especially early in the season in non-conference play. But it's a deep, deep room, and you can see these guys are committed to the process and they're committed to what needs to happen in order to be great. And again, having Billy Bowman back, you cannot say enough about his decision to return for one more year and what it means for Oklahoma's safety room. Because listen, you would be pretty good, but you wouldn't have the experience. You wouldn't have that leadership capabilities that you have right now. You'd have probably had to go to the portal and get a transfer safety to at least give you a solid floor with some experience, or you would have had to move Woody Washington full time over to safety. With Billy Bowman, you've got an All-American coming back that gives you that experience, gives you that playmaking ability, and you're set up. I mean, the next several years of safety play is just set up perfectly, and it's all because Billy Bowman decided to come back. So safety room is going to be exciting.
GameTime makes getting to the ballpark even faster and easier. Prices on the GameTime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and their best price guarantee, GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. GameTime has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats. Find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets and football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And the GameTime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the free app and new users can get $20 off their first purchase with code Locked On. Terms apply. That's code Locked On with $20 off your first purchase with GameTime. Download the GameTime app today. Last minute tickets, the lowest price guaranteed.
May be a good lesson for Brandon Ayuk.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast.
The Devonte Adams situation, for one, is very intriguing. For two, it's a very important lesson, I think, for other NFL players in general, but specifically wide receivers, because Devonte is a wide receiver and one of the best in the league, to getting what they want, right? And we've all heard the saying, be careful what you ask for because you might just get it. Well, Devonte grew up a Raiders fan, always knew he wanted to play for the Raiders someday. Decided he and A-Rod, they were going to go their separate ways. A-Rod went to the Jets. So Devonte took his opportunity, essentially forced his way to the Las Vegas Raiders. And it appears now, Lauren, that there might be some buyer's remorse there. So what do we know so far of what's going on with Devonte Adams this offseason?
Yeah, there's been it's been interesting to see how when the initial trading out of Green Bay happened, there was a lot of silence around this, and kind of all we got was snippets of, maybe Devonte Adams just wanted to be a Raider and wasn't really an anti-Packers thing, or maybe how much of it was about Aaron Rodgers. I mean, and slowly, just for some reason this year, years later now this summer, Devonte Adams has been more willing to reveal some of the details there about what went down in Green Bay and some of the offers that were back and forth there. And obviously we knew all along that he wanted to be a Raider, like you said, and also wanted to be united with Derek Carr, his college teammate at Fresno State. It made a lot of sense. I mean, it was strange, but we could kind of piece together logically, okay, it makes sense as he's getting a little bit later in his career, and Green Bay is kind of in a transition period anyway. There was some reasons to believe it made sense for both sides. It made sense for both sides at the time that Devonte Adams could kind of go where he wanted to go. But then all of a sudden, the quarterback changes in Las Vegas, and it's not the guy he had gone to sign up for. Obviously, they ended up having to make a coaching change as well in that process. And now it's not the Raiders that Devonte Adams came to. But I think what I find most interesting about this is throughout this process, the Raiders have given Adams a lot of power. You talk about the lesson for Brandon Ayuk and the wide receivers that might want to get traded and not end up getting what they want. But the lesson for the Raiders as well, they bring in Devonte Adams and they kind of have him have a say in personnel decisions. He's a big reason why Antonio Pierce is still the head coach there. He and the other players touched for Pierce to still be there. So Adams got the coach he wanted, but couldn't get to keep the quarterback he wanted. It's kind of weird. I don't know if they just didn't go all in enough on Adams or went all in too much on Adams. But either way, it feels like the end is nearer rather than farther away.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it is. I think it's a cautionary tale, right? And I think that it's just, I remember when the trade happened, and I remember saying to people like, look, like, given being put in the same position, if I had the power to go exactly where I wanted, work for the exact company or whatever franchise within my business that I want to, I can't say I wouldn't do the same thing, right? Like I think a lot of us would have done the same thing, but at the same time, you kind of look at it, you're like, man, like look at what you got, and Devontae is not responsible for what Aaron Rodgers does, but it's like, look at what you guys broke up. I know they only won one Super Bowl together, you know what I mean? But very competitive team, obviously Super Bowl, contenders year in and year out. And arguably, if Tom Brady doesn't make the jump to the NFC, maybe the Packers have another Super Bowl with that 2-0. All I know, Lauren, is that hiring Josh McDaniels is basically just poison to any franchise. So no franchise should ever do it again as a head coach, because now both the Broncos and the Raiders have learned the hard way. And I think, well, the Colts, they kind of dodged that bullet. But let's talk about potential ramifications, but resolutions to this Devonte Adams situation. So now, obviously, the conversation is, will the Raiders, or could Devonte force himself, or however it comes to be, could Devonte end up with the Jets, back with A-Rod? What are your thoughts on that storyline?
Yeah, so host of Locked On Raiders, your boy Q, was on with Peter Burkowski on Locked On Sports Today yesterday and talked a little bit about this, where he's like, Devonte Adams, like right now, is fairly happy. I mean, like he has a great relationship with Antonio Pierce, and Q said like he and Aiden O'Connell are good friends. Like they get along well. So like it's not that Devonte Adams is right now putting his foot down saying, I want to be out of here, put me with Aaron Rodgers. But Q kind of conceded like, hey, well, what happens if it's week 6 and the Raiders are 1-5 or 2-4 and O'Connell's having trouble getting the ball to Devonte Adams? And you might get along well and have a good relationship and be friends. But if Adams isn't having the kind of production that he wants and the offense isn't producing as well as he wants, because Aiden O'Connell is far from a proven quarterback and certainly far from Aaron Rodgers. Like this feels to me like something that isn't going to resolve today, but all of the seeds have been planted now to where I think we're all just looking at the clock, the calendar, wondering when the trade is going to happen, just not maybe right away. It's kind of like when we talk about rumors that a head coach is going to be fired, and then we kind of know that it's going to happen eventually. It's just a matter of when that happens. And it feels more like a potential trade deadline deal, but Devonte Adams' salary doesn't make this very easy either.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And obviously the Jets, they've got a lot of incentive to kind of go all in, right. And try to get, Aaron Rodgers, like you don't trade for Aaron Rodgers thinking like, man, we've got a decade to put this thing together. No, you trade for Aaron Rodgers thinking we've got a few years to put this thing together. So if that's the move that maybe they want to make, and maybe they're willing to take on some of that salary, maybe give up a little less draft capital in exchange for doing that, all these things. What really surprised me, Lauren, you touched on it a couple of times, is that it is kind of a known thing. Like he's an Antonio Pierce guy, right? And Antonio Pierce is kind of in this situation where there's some people out here wondering, like, could the Raiders do him dirty if this season doesn't go well, given what's happened around the organization, given the roster he's dealing with? Given the quarterback situation he's dealing with, could they do him dirty and run him out of town if, I don't know, Bill Belichick and Tom Brady want to come to Vegas for one more ride or something kind of crazy? That's a what if. That's not a report. That's a what if. So just take that with a grain of salt. But there's been some Devonte Adams, Tom Brady, talk as well. And now, of course, there's all these clips coming out. I saw a clip earlier of him being frustrated after Jimmy Garoppolo missed him on a wide open route on the left side of the field and being frustrated. So all those things are kind of coming out, right? And the biggest thing for me, I've always said, is from covering these NFL teams, once news and reports start making it public, or once players start saying things public, the thing I always remind myself is every player in this business, at least established one especially, has already said this stuff internally before they ever say it externally. In fact, I would say they probably said it internally 3 times before they ever say anything externally. So for Devonte Adams, like if he's saying this stuff publicly now, and again, he's not out here like just throwing the organization completely under the bus or anything, but airing some frustrations publicly, it's been aired in closed doors. You can believe that it's been aired in closed doors. So it'll be interesting to see how this thing unfolds. And then finally, Lauren, Brandon Ayuk, you know what I mean? He wants to get paid. He says he wants to be a part of the franchise. Now, obviously, he's officially requested a trade, but he said before he wants to stay with the 49ers. Is there something that Brandon Ayuk, in your opinion, should be pulling from this situation with Devonte Adams? And how, if at all, do you think you should change the way that Brandon is approaching his situation in San Francisco?
Yeah, I think you get caught as these receivers in competing interests. Do you want to be super, super high paid, or do you want to play in the place with the players that you want to play with? Like next season, 2025, Devonte Adams' cap hit becomes $44 million. He'd be the highest paid wide receiver in football next season. That's a lot harder to be on a team that you want to be on, but it's a lot of money. So do you want to be where you're going to be able to get the money in Vegas and maybe be unhappy, or do you 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 unhappy?
That because like I said, we're going to open. Obviously, we're going to do segment 2 all on Ayuk. So just give kind of like a quick like overarching thought, and then we'll come back and dive deeper into it.
Yeah. Cool. So you can go somewhere and get traded to a team that's going to be willing to pay you the big money, but like Devonte Adams, maybe it doesn't end up being where you want it to be, but you get the big contract, or maybe you can stay where you want to be, but that team can't afford to give you as big of a contract as maybe that other location. So what's going to be more important to you, the money or the situation? And that's a lot for those players to balance.